Okay, thank you very much for joining. What you're looking at, obviously, is the Great Pyramid at Giza, one of three, but actually one of 8 original pyramids. Most academics date the Great Pyramid's construction at 4,500 years ago, but that's clearly impossible. This structure would be very difficult for us in the 21st century to construct. So the concept that a bunch of Egyptian slaves did this is ridiculous. It's composed of 2.5 million multi-ton blocks. And again, according to standard academia, they say it was constructed in 25 years. That would mean the cutting, moving, shaping, and putting into place one multi-ton block every 2 minutes. So just forget about the conventional history that you've heard as regards Egypt. This is a megalithic structure that was likely made 12,000 years ago. Now, the dynastic Egyptians go back approximately 5,000 years. So this structure is likely 7,000 years older than them. The dynastic people simply found this on the Giza Plateau and they adopted it. They never actually did anything with it. And over the course of time, it was, of course, gradually, to some degree, taken apart. Also, independent research is what's important in this day and age, not listening so much to standard academia, because they just keep telling the same boring story over and over again. So independent researchers have figured out many things, including the fact that the limestone that makes up the Great Pyramid was the stone was taken from 3 different quarries, none of them on the Giza Plateau. The quarries are actually closer to Cairo, so each one of these stones had to be moved across the Nile. So that makes it even more complex. And also, it's not a 4-sided structure, it's actually an 8-sided structure. Oops. So most of the casing stone is gone from the Great Pyramid. It was pillaged over the course of time, but we see the inner stones here, and look at the amount of weathering of the stone. That, I've been told by geologists, is much more than a couple or 3,000 years, but many, many thousands of years. And again, we believe the dating of this structure to be 12,000 years old. What civilization? Some people call them the ancient Cometians because the original name for Egypt is Kemet, which means the Black Land. Was it aliens? I don't know, maybe. Was it Atlanteans? Possibly. So here again, you see the weathered surfaces of the exterior of the Great Pyramid. And again, the weather, like even the wind and sand blowing and eroding the surfaces would take a lot longer than the conventional time period. It's believed in general that the casing stone was removed maybe about 2,000 years ago for the construction of the city of Cairo, which Cairo didn't exist in Egyptian, dynastic Egyptian times. It's a later construction. It's a city of 30 million people now, but in actual dynastic times, it's likely that it didn't even exist. Giza and the area on the other side of the Nile is where ancient Egypt, or most of ancient Egypt, is located. So there are dynastic structures, of course, but then pre-dynastic. This is the flooring outside of the Great Pyramid, and you can see that the stone blocks interlock. Of course, there's been a lot of weathering over time, but some of these blocks of the floor weigh 40, 50 tons possibly. And the average weight of the stones of the Great Pyramid are about 2.5 tons, but there are some, of course, which are much bigger than that. Then there are a series of shafts on the Giza Plateau. This one is actually right next to the Great Pyramid, and it's filled, unfortunately, with garbage now, but in the distant past, I've actually been underground in Giza, under the Giza Plateau, 4 stories below. That was done by special permission. And my guide, Yusuf, who took me there, said there are at least 10 more stories underneath the plateau. So it's almost like, it's a series of shafts and tunnels. And the Great Pyramid locks into the Giza Plateau. It doesn't simply sit on top of it. And this is also next to the Great Pyramid. You can see that this is actually basalt stone. And you can see the, oops, sorry about that. So you can see the horizontal cutting marks on the side of this basalt. That is not modern. Basalt is a very hard stone. So the Egyptians had dynastic Egyptians had bronze tools. That was the hardest metal they had. This had to have been done with something at least like diamond cutting tools. And diamond tools were not invented until the 19th century AD, not the 19th century BC. This again, more of the cutting marks. And what we have been able to figure out too is that the penetration of the tool involved, in this case a straight saw, every motion of the saw penetrated the stone by 3 millimeters. And that is 500 times more efficient as a modern diamond tool. So we're talking very advanced, lost ancient high technology. Not just here on the Giza Plateau, but we'll see many other places that you may not have heard of. Everyone, of course, knows the Great Pyramid and knows Giza, but ancient pre-dynastic Egypt, most of the structures are actually underground. They were built underground on purpose, and it's believed that at least 85% of ancient pre-dynastic Egypt is still underground. It's all been locked off, of course, because this is very inconvenient information for standard Egyptology. But thanks to the internet, thanks to independent research and study, we're able to learn more and more about this very advanced technology that existed long before the time of the pharaohs. And by the way, did you know that the word pharaoh is actually Greek? The original word is Petra, which means the high house. And the high house was the woman. So the ancient pharaohs, at least from the school that I've been studying, were the matriarchal line. Men and women had equal functions. The man, the so-called male pharaoh, was the great protector of his wife and people, but the royal bloodline and title actually was the woman. So Petra is from where we get pharaoh. And here we are at the second pyramid, so-called Kafre, named after the pharaoh, male pharaoh Kafre, but Kafre did not build this pyramid. Again, it was found, damaged. It dates from the same time frame as the Great Pyramid, so it's 12,000 years old. And here you can see some of the casing stone at the bottom. That is granite, and the granite comes from the Aswan Quarry, which is in southern Egypt, so that's somewhere in the nature of at least 500 miles away. Or it could also come from the Sinai Desert, which is hundreds of miles to the east. You see the weathering of the surface, the way that the granite is peeling off. That could be from actually intense heat that struck and damaged the Great Pyramid during this series of cataclysms some 12,000 or 11,700 years ago. And the chisel marks you see are attempts either during dynastic or possibly Greco-Roman times of trying to cut the granite blocks into smaller pieces, but they basically gave up and abandoned that. Now this is also on the Giza Plateau. Again, look at the weathering of this limestone. These blocks are 20 to 40 tons in size. And originally they had covering of granite on the fronts and the backs. And so now all you see is the exposed limestone. And once again, geologists have told me that the weathering of this stone is much more than, say, 2,000 or 3,000 years old. And this is pyramid number 3, the so-called Menkaure pyramid, which is the smaller of the 3. Again, the conventional story, which makes no sense whatsoever, is that Khufu built the first one, the Great Pyramid, and then his son Kafre built the second pyramid, and Menkaure did not have the resources to build one of the same scale, so he made one smaller. But they didn't build any of this. They found them in place, and each one of these was an energetic structure originally. They don't function anymore, but they were built as giant resonators of the Earth's energy. And so they're different shapes and sizes based upon the specific function that they had. And it was like a giant array of, as I said, 7 or 8 great pyramids. You've probably heard of the Bent Pyramid, and you've likely also heard of the Red Pyramid, and there are also other ones. There's a site called Abu Rawash, another one called Abu Sir, and another one called Abu Ghurab, all in the area of the Giza Plateau, because the Giza Plateau goes on for something like 60 to 100 miles. It's much more than just where the so-called Great Pyramids are. So once again, and you see these curious protrusions. Again, this is red granite that was brought all the way from Aswan. And no one really knows what the function of the knobs are. Some say it was to place the stones into position by hooking ropes underneath. That's kind of silly. It probably had to do with the tuning of the structures. Once they were built, in order to resonate properly, it's quite likely that they had to be fine-tuned, and it is possible that the knobs were for that purpose. Then we have these 2 large boxes, which are outside of the Great Museum in Cairo, which is actually being decommissioned because they built the largest museum in the world on the Giza Plateau, which is a logical place to have it. So it's a massive structure that will be finished in 2020. And again, the largest museum in the world. So on the right-hand side, what you have is a sarcophagus. That is for a dead Egyptian person of nobility. You see all of the hieroglyphics on the outside describing the life and times of that person. But notice how rough the construction technique is, very, very crude. And that reflects the fact that the dynastic Egyptians had very crude tools. They had saws, yes, but saws made out of bronze. Bronze is not hard enough to be able to cut granite. And even if you add silica sand as a lubricant or abrasive, you can't cut quartz crystal or quartz stone with quartz stone sand. They would just nullify each other. Now the one on the left-hand side, they admit is older. It's either from the first dynasty or it's from the so-called archaic period. And what archaic means is pre-dynastic. So you can see it's much larger. The surfaces are almost perfectly flat. The lid and the box itself are from one piece of stone. And if you were to feel the interior, it's as smooth on the inside as glass. And you can see reflected in the bottom part of the lid, you can see that glossy shine. So this was clearly made with very advanced technology, and stonemasons who have been asked say this would be a very difficult thing to make even in the 21st century with diamond cutting technology. We also see no evidence of tool marks whatsoever. So whoever made this made it almost perfect. Unfortunately, because it's so ancient, The exterior is badly damaged, and it doesn't help, of course, that it's sitting outside the museum. And it was probably brought from an ancient site called Sakkara. Now, I don't think this was a tomb. I think this was actually, again, like the Great Pyramid and other pyramids, an energetic resonance device. Because if you tap on the side of it, it makes a very distinct sound. It responds, funnily enough, to the sound of Om, which is also the resonance of our planet, several octaves lower, but also the king's chamber resonates to the sound of Om. It's almost deafening if you get 40 people in there making properly the Om sound. So here's another photo of the box. Again, you can see the original surfaces were originally very finely polished, but because it is so ancient, of course, erosion, damage, possibly even vandalism has happened to it. But if you were to take those wooden blocks out, it would more or less hermetically seal. And once again, just a comparison. The box on the left, which is a sarcophagus, 4th dynasty. Box on the right, so-called 1st dynasty, but I think it's pre-dynastic, and I think it's contemporary with the Great Pyramid at being somewhere in the region of 12,000 years old. Now, inside the museum, in a dark corner, because they don't really want you to see it, is a box, a giant box weighing 60 to 80 tons that was never completed. And what happened was we see evidence of 2 circular saws trying to cut the lid of the box off from the bottom. These saws were somewhere in the region of 6 feet in diameter. And we see the tool marks, we see the saw cutting marks, and the fact that the saw started, the top saw started to move into the box. It wasn't following the straight line that it was supposed to. And so part of the lid snapped off, and they simply abandoned the project. They didn't try to recycle it. They didn't try to find some other function for it. They didn't try to cut it up into pieces. They just left it. So that shows you that they had very advanced technology, and this cutting of stone was so simple for them that they would simply get another block and finish that one. So that's the funny thing, is we find what you would call human error, like saws going off course, drill holes going off course and things like that, which sounds much more like a human proclivity than an alien one, I would think. But again, we don't know who the original builders were, but they were more technologically advanced than we are today. Now, this is the lid of another giant box weighing 60 to 80 tons. Again, you see the straight lines. That is another type of saw. It could even be a type of bandsaw, but you can see it's wavering up and down as it's cutting. That's why I think it was a bandsaw of some sort. And this box, once again, was never completed. We don't know why, but it too is located in the main museum in Cairo. Now, what's this? This is called the schist disc. And it's called the schist disc because most academics believe that it's made out of a type of stone called schist. But in fact, our resident geologist, who we take all over the world with us, Susan Moore, has declared that it's not schist, but it's a metamorphosed kind of sediment or clay material. And she said that it would be very hard, very dense, and very vibrational, very resonant. It obviously looks like it was something that spun, and unfortunately it was found broken. So the museum badly tried to repair it, but the original parts of it are technically almost perfect. And it's also clear that it appears that it fitted onto a shaft of some kind and then spun locally at very high rate of speed. But what was its function? Again, likely resonance of some kind. Because the fins on it are not curved or bent, it wasn't meant to push or pull water, but maybe it was meant to set up some kind of vibrational frequency. Some even suggest the right frequency to levitate the stone and move it, because there's no way the giant boxes we've been looking at, or the Great Pyramid, stones, etc., were moved by hand. They had to have been moved using some far more sophisticated technique. So here's another view from the top of it. Again, you can see there are three blades on it. You can also see the different shades of color that distinguishes the difference between where it was repaired and original. So the lighter shade of gray is the repair work, the darker shade is original. But the sad thing is that it was found broken at Sakkara. They may have many more of them hiding in the basement or the warehouses of the museum, and the fact that this object is actually on display is quite remarkable, because it's clearly the result of advanced technology, and they put a description on it as being a lotus vase. I don't think so. Any engineer would say that's a machine part. Then we see other objects like this one. You see the perfect circle in the middle on the top. So clearly this was to some degree spun on a lathe. And also you see that it too was found broken. So this also was found in the same location at Sakkara in Egypt, very close to the Giza Plateau. Then we find core drill holes. This is in another one of the giant granite boxes, again weighing in the region of 60 tons, much, much bigger than a coffin for a human being. So, of course, it is quite probable that these giant boxes were used during dynastic times for funerals, because they would be very useful. You would put a series of wooden boxes inside, the pharaoh or the pharaoh's whoever, or noble inside the innermost box. But these core drill holes like this, again, this technology was not developed until the late 19th century AD. You can tell by the patina that whenever this drill was operating, it was a very, very long time ago, and the dynastic people did not have this technology. You need something harder than quartz crystal, because there's a lot of quartz crystal in granite, which is 7 out of 10 on the hardness scale. So you would need something harder, again, likely diamond, or maybe even something more exotic than diamond. Another big box, again, probably recycled and used as a tomb. The hieroglyphics were carved on afterwards, probably at the time that the noble person was being put into the box, or just before that. But the box itself is made of quartzite. Again, quartzite is 7 to 7.5 in hardness. So this would require at least diamond level saw and drill technology to make. So it was found by the dynastic people and reused. We see the same thing in other countries, like in Peru. The megalithic structures were not built by the Inca culture. The Inca found those structures, used them, and adopted them. And then here, this is called a pyramidon. And maybe it was on top of one of the pyramids. Maybe it wasn't. Of course, the capstone of the Great Pyramid is missing. This is actually too small to be it. But once again, the hieroglyphics on the surface were carved during dynastic times, but the stone itself was shaped thousands of years before. Again, you can see damage to the surfaces. That's what we see in basically everything which is pre-dynastic. We see damage. I don't think that it was simply vandalism. I think it was all as a result of ancient cataclysmic activity in the distant past. So this is one of 3 that I believe are in the Cairo Museum. But the Cairo Museum is full of artifacts. They have something like 150,000 of them on display. So how many million artifacts do they have still hiding in warehouses? Some of them being so bizarre in nature that putting them on display would shatter Egyptology as we know it. And now we're at the Osirion, which is located at Abydos in the middle of Egypt, close to the Nile. Almost all of the megalithic structures are found very close to the Nile. And so it was built on purpose underground. The granite stone in the background, those giant columns and pillars weighing 40 to 60 tons, again, were brought from, likely from Aswan in the very far south, which is hundreds of miles away, or from the Sinai Desert, which is hundreds of miles away. And then in the foreground, you see that very large stone. That is a piece of quartzite once again. And if you look about 1/5 of the way down, you can see a horizontal line. That is the longest saw mark that I have seen so far in Egypt. It's about 12 to 14 feet long. And that's a very large saw would have to be involved. Again, using at a bare minimum diamond level technology. And quartzite is from a quarry near Cairo. So again, that's a distance of at least 400 miles, I believe. And then the wall on the left-hand side, you can see is somewhat polygonal. That's also made of quartzite. And that's the interesting thing about the ancient sites in Egypt. All of the stone that was used during the megalithic pre-dynastic times is very high in quartz crystal. And quartz, of course, is very good in terms of its piezoelectric qualities and vibrational qualities and even acoustic qualities. So the stone was specifically selected. It wasn't simply that they would take it from any quarry. We find the same thing in Peru and other ancient mysterious locations in different parts of the planet. But the main focus for me are Egypt, Lebanon, Jordan, Easter Island, Peru, and Bolivia. By the way, independent research has done radiocarbon testing of organic material at Stonehenge, and that independent testing dates Stonehenge at 12,000 years old. So this 12,000 year thing keeps recurring and recurring and recurring. The standard dating of Stonehenge is 4,500 years, making it contemporary with the Great Pyramid, but no. And also originally, Stonehenge was 2 perfect circles. It was rebuilt during the 20th century based on guesswork. And over the course of hundreds, if not thousands of years, the stones of Stonehenge were broken up and used by farmers and other people. So originally Stonehenge was 2 perfect circles, and the stone was, again, like a quartzite and incredibly highly polished. This is also at the Osirion. It's actually it's a series of underground tunnels that may have originally carried water. So a pragmatic function to the Osirion. There is one theory that it was almost like an organic water pump. That's why it was buried or built underground, that the water of the Nile, especially during the time of the Nile floods, would fill the chamber, the main chamber of the Osirion, and it would naturally pump its way up these 2 ramps. There's one on the left, one on the right, gradual slope going up, because there's almost no water for agriculture in this area. So that's one of the theories. It was not built as a cemetery, as most academics believe. So this too is at the Osirion. Again, you can see that it was built underground. If you look higher up, you see modern construction and also dynastic period work, which is much, much cruder. The fact that these giant stones are broken, part of it is the result of ancient cataclysmic activity, and other is attempts at quarrying the stone during dynastic and later times. But it was found in modern times. It was found in the 19th century, completely buried. They had to actually dig down in order to find it and uncover it. So that probably would have been thousands upon thousands of years of sand buildup. This again is a pre-dynastic structure. You can still see that there's water in the bottom a little bit. So almost everything that is pre-dynastic was pragmatic in function, not necessarily spiritual, but during dynastic times, the dynastic people were, of course, a very religious, spiritual people. So they would adopt these ancient sites and use them for spiritual purposes, not the original function. And you find the same thing in places like Peru, where the Inca adopted ancient structures and made them sacred sites of worship, etc., like sun temples and moon temples and things of that nature. So just another view, once again, of the Osirion. You can see the giant blocks, the almost puffy blocks in the background of the quartzite, and then the dynastic and later much, much cruder work above. And that's what you find, is you find the oldest work tends to be at the lowest level, and then the upper work is cruder. So rather than civilizations going from being primitive and then more and more sophisticated over time, you have incredibly advanced technology and then a sudden drop off. And that tells you quite obviously that the original builders disappeared, whether they left on purpose or whether they died out, we don't know. But then these sites were left abandoned for thousands upon thousands of years, and then found by the dynastic people who reutilized them to some degree. So now we are at Karnak. And Karnak is one of the largest temple complexes in the world. It takes hours upon hours upon hours to walk through it. And again, what we find at Karnak is we find two building techniques and two time periods. The inner core is the ancient megalithic part, and then everything outside of the inner core is dynastic Egyptian. All of the dynastic Egyptian work was made using sandstone and limestone, which are relatively easy stones to work, and the quarries are relatively close. But all of the pre-dynastic work is in granite and basalt and a type of very hard alabaster. And if you look very carefully on the left-hand side in the foreground, you see three obelisks, and then go to the right and you'll see two more. Go to the right and you'll see two more. So they're lined up in a series. They weren't simply put in different places because the people decided that they wanted to put them in some kind of random order. But the obelisks themselves were made during pre-dynastic times. Each one is made of granite from Aswan. Some of them weigh hundreds of tons. There's one at Luxor that I believe is 450 tons. And so I believe the function of the obelisks were as, again, resonant structures. I think they were receivers of energy. The energy from the Great Pyramids, when they were functioning, would radiate out, and then the obelisks would be the receptors. And so it would be like an ancient Wi-Fi system. Not a system for sending electricity, but a very specific tone of energy. And that's why they were lined up in a line like this. And so the dynastic people find them, and then they decide to carve hieroglyphs on them and reuse them as ways of telling stories or that sort of thing. But there is no way that the dynastic Egyptians made these obelisks. So Karnak is one of the most special sites. Also, the so-called Holy of Holies, which is this east-west path, is 20 degrees off east and west. And what that's telling us is that 12,000 years ago, again, there was a major cataclysmic event that happened in Egypt, and the axis of the earth shifted. So originally 12,000 years ago, it was perfectly vertical, our planet was, and then likely a series of cataclysmic events happened, causing the earth to tilt, or actually bend. And that would cause the whole orientation of the structure or the ancient site to move by somewhere around 20 degrees. So any culture that's anything knows how to line things up perfectly north, south, east, and west. It's not difficult because you use the equinoxes and the solstices to do that. So the fact that these sites are, some of these sites are 20 degrees off indicates that they were originally constructed prior to the Earth's axis shifting. And so this is where we are at Karnak itself. This is walking down through the center core, which is the Holy of Holies. On the left-hand side, you see one of the obelisks, and on the right-hand side, another obelisk. And you can see that the damage to the obelisk on the right is in the lower section, not the upper section. The upper area is actually technically in very good shape, but the lower area, especially the lower 50 feet, is damaged. And this works with the theory of Dr. Robert Schoch that 12,000 years ago, plasma ejection from the sun struck different locations on the planet, very high heat, blasting the surface of the stone off. And so all along this Holy of Holies, on the left side and on the right side, we see heat damage, minimum 2,000 degrees Celsius. And so Robert Schoch believes that it was plasma outbursts of the sun that were part of the cataclysmic events that damaged ancient sites like this. And a temperature of 2,000 plus degrees Celsius would vaporize any organic life living there. So all of the people, all the plants, all the animals would be vaporized. The soil would be made sterile. And so nothing could grow in these areas for likely at least 1,000, if not several thousands of years. So the sites were built, destroyed, abandoned, rediscovered, reused. And here, this is also in the same area at Karnak. You see that perfectly vertical line, that is a saw cut. Once again, it's a saw cut in hard granite, and so that would require diamond level technology. There's no way that that saw mark was done in modern times because these are very special places to Egypt and of course to the world in general. So we see lots of fascinating evidence of ancient lost high technology from pre-dynastic times. The hieroglyphs and other surface carvings that you can see, that was all added during dynastic times. And again, the stone came from Aswan, that's somewhere in the region of 400 miles away. Now we start to see drill holes. If you look at the center of the stone in the center of the picture, you can see that that was a tube drill, and a tube drill about that big. That would be industrial in nature. A drill to power something of that diameter would be, I would think, in the region of at least 100, if not several hundred horsepower. The dynastic people, of course, did not have electricity as far as we know, and they did not have perfectly round drill technology. Their hardest material, once again, was copper or bronze. And so copper and bronze cannot cut hard stone like this. So we're looking once again at obvious ancient lost high technology, and the feed rate, or the boring rate of penetrating that stone is estimated by engineers that I've been here with to be 500 times more efficient than a 21st century tube drill. So again, we're looking at technology beyond our present day capacity. And it's not like there are, say, 1 or 2 or 5 or 10 of these drill holes. They're all different shapes and sizes. This is the largest that we've found so far, but there are hundreds of these that I've seen here at Karnak, and also other locations such as Abu Sir and Abu Ghurab, which are located closer to the Giza Plateau. Here at Karnak, we're somewhere in the middle. We're in the area of Thebes, which was the ancient capital most of the time for the dynastic people, up until their fall at the hands of the Romans, or the Greeks, the Romans, and then the Islamic period. So this is a close-up of what this tube drill looks like. Again, you can see it's very large, and the thickness of the drill bit itself, of the wall, is about like that. And for the scale of what this tube drill would be, that is much, much thinner than what a modern tube drill is, because in a modern tube drill, you have the diamond encrusted material on the front of the drill and on the back, or the inside and the outside. And so a modern drill of this scale would be approximately that thick. But because we can see where the stone is broken off on the left-hand side, the wall of this is about like that. So the tube drill itself would have been made of a technology of material more advanced than what we have to this very day. Once again, you see this heat damage. It's like the stone, the surface was blasted off. And also the carving. The carving is very simple. On the front, or actually the left-hand side, you can see hieroglyphics. Those were added during dynastic times, but the original flower shapes are technically almost perfect. And I believe that that once again was done in probably pre-dynastic times, but it's the very strange weathering of the stone, which is very curious. When you strike granite with high heat, it basically turns the stone, or it pulverizes the stone on the surface like this. And also you can see the discoloration of the surface. Once again, this indicates very high heat, and it's quite probable that the damage came from the east at sunrise. So this solar flare or plasma struck this location in Egypt at sunrise about 12,000 years ago, went straight through the Holy of Holies. If it was a vibrational series of structures at that time, then obviously the function, it would have turned itself off, because the damage would have done that to it. And so it's most probable that all of the megalithic structures, if they were vibrational and resonant in function, utilizing possibly the Earth's natural vibrational energy, they automatically all turned off at the same time. But there still is enough slight resonance in these areas, and of course the ominous nature or amazing nature of the stonework itself, that's why the dynastic Egyptians 5,000 years ago, when they entered Egypt and saw these huge damaged structures, that they obviously turned these into their own sacred sites, because they were in awe of what they found. And that's, of course, also the case of what we find in Peru. At locations such as Machu Picchu, the central core of Machu Picchu is megalithic in nature. The Inca found Machu Picchu probably 600 or 700 years ago, and they were in awe of the megalithic work. And so they decided to adopt the site and then turn it into a major center and a major place of worship and sacredness. We see this over and over again. An ancient site is found. The people we know of, such as the dynastic people or the Inca, were in awe of what they found, and then they would obviously reconstruct at the same location with very inferior technology. We also see the same thing at Baalbek in Lebanon. Most academics believe that that's a Roman period construction, but it's very clear that the Romans found that as a giant megalithic series of structures damaged by cataclysm. So they adopted the site and then they turned it into a sacred space. And we also find that at Petra in Jordan. Most of you will be acquainted with the so-called treasury at Petra, which is a cut rock surface that was famous from one of the Indiana Jones films. And most people go to Petra and they look at the treasury, then they turn around and leave. They don't realize that Petra is 7 miles or 12 kilometers long, non-stop. I was there 2 years ago, and it took us 8 hours to walk to the end of Petra and back again. Standard academia says that the so-called Nabatean Arab people built Petra, but there's no way, because once again we find machine marks in multitude at Petra. The stone, I've been told by our geologist, is not sandstone, but it's actually quartzite. So again, you're looking at more or less diamond level technology to do the shaping and cutting. And there are at least 5 chambers at Petra cut into the bedrock itself. And the amount of material removed from each of those chambers to form the chambers is 300,000 cubic feet of material. So we're not talking local nomadic people finding Petra and building it. What we do know is that these nomadic people found Petra in ruins. Again, we see cataclysmic damage at Petra. They adopt the site, they make it sacred, and they make it their home. So still at Karnak, this material again is a type of, what is it? It's a calcium carbonate based stone, similar to, what is it? Well, it's a calcium carbonate based stone. And you can see that it's been repaired heavily. That's all modern repair work. And what you're not going to believe, and unfortunately, there's not someone standing there. This structure is around 20 feet tall, and originally it was made of 1 piece of stone. So this would have weighed in the region of 1,000 to 2,000 tons. And the quarry, there is no quarry of stone of this size in Egypt. So it's believed by our geologists that at a very minimum, it was brought from Turkey. Again, 1,000 to 2,000 tons, maybe even bigger than that. 1 piece of stone moved hundreds, if not maybe 1,000 miles from its quarry to here. And again, you see the hieroglyphics on the surface. The hieroglyphics were done during the dynastic time, but the simpler shapes like that curved fluting on the top and the rounded area, that is pre-dynastic, and it's quite probable that that those shapes were used again for resonance or acoustics or both. So I'm still trying to remember what kind of stone that is. Oh, it's a type of alabaster. It's not actual alabaster. The technical term is calcite, but it's kind of an alabaster. And then if you look on the left-hand side, you see that mud wall. That's Roman period. So you see the incredible sophistication of this large stone piece of work, and then the crude nature of the work by the Roman people. So this is what one of the corners looks like. It's actually rounded. And again, the hieroglyphics are relatively crude. So they were added during dynastic times. This material is soft enough that you can kind of shape it with hardened bronze if you add arsenic to it. But the fact that the corner is round, and if you put your finger and pull it down, it's as if obviously a machine did it, because it's perfect. Any human using hand tools has a tendency to make errors or mistakes, but this is perfect. And why would it be a rounded corner? Well, it's probably a rounded corner because that would allow vibration or resonance to move in an efficient way. Resonance and vibration like to move in waves or curves or straight lines. So in order to move around a corner like that, if you had it a sharp edge, then that would disrupt the movement of the sound or vibration. And still at Karnak, here is, once again, you see the damage to the surface of this obelisk. It's quite plausible that the hieroglyphs were added later, but a very intriguing thing is that we see on some of the megalithic work in some locations, we see deeply carved hieroglyphics, which are perfect or almost technically perfect in hard stone like this, this granite. And so, believe it or not, it's going to be hard to believe, but I think hieroglyphics dates from the pre-dynastic civilization. I think it was much more sophisticated than what the dynastic civilization hieroglyphics are. So it's my honest belief that the dynastic people found the hieroglyphics on the stone, and they reinterpreted the meaning. They made up their own symbolism as to what it meant, and that originally the pre-dynastic people used this as a very sophisticated picture-coded language, much more complex than the dynastic people. And once again, this is part of what's left of an obelisk, and you can see that the whole corner has been sheared right off. Again, this is likely heat damage that occurred approximately 12,000 years ago. And the kind of crude hieroglyphics here were probably added during the dynastic time period, because dynastic hieroglyphics are quite shallow and small in nature, but the ones that I believe are pre-dynastic are much deeper and technically almost perfect. You can put your finger inside the curves, and it looks like a router device of some kind. Machining went in and did the cutting work. So, of course, at this point in the presentation, I think it should be pretty obvious to you that we're looking at two different major time periods. The famous dynastic stuff that we know about, and then the pre-dynastic stuff that you're likely just being informed of today. So this is, if you continue along this Holy of Holies, which is about 20 degrees off of east-west, then we're coming near to the end of it. The work in the background is from the dynastic time period. That's a structure made of limestone, which again is relatively soft, but the stones we're going to be looking at, again, are the much harder stones of the pre-dynastic period, showing cataclysmic damage. So as we're getting closer to it, you can see the stone here is basically falling apart. This is granite, which once again has been struck by high heat. I don't know how big the stones originally were, but this is not natural weathering of granite. This is a burst or a blast of intense heat, 2000 degrees Celsius plus, destroyed the structure, and then over the course of time, during the dynastic period and up to this very day, slow degradation of the stone. Also, what the heat did Most of the granite from Aswan is of a rose or pinkish color, and the ones affected by the heat are blackened. So that's the mineral nature inside, maybe the feldspar, I'm not quite sure, that is very heat sensitive. So most of the granite work that we see from the pre-dynastic time has been blackened, as well as the surface scorched, the surface flaking off, or even falling off. So again, when you strike granite with intense heat, it tends to turn into sand. The crystals explode more or less on a very micro level. And then here again in the foreground is another piece of ancient granite. Again, it shows extreme heat damage from ancient times. And then on the right-hand side are calcite works, which we're going to have a closer look at. These are also pre-dynastic. The structure in the background is from the dynastic times. You can see that the stonework in the structure in the background is much smaller, and that's what we see, that the dynastic work was made in sections, not done in massive blocks, and usually from local material. So the sandstone and limestone quarries for Karnak are not really that far away. So here, again, this calcite has been struck with very intense heat. Calcite tends to crumble when it's hit with high heat. And you can see the obvious signs of two drill holes at the bottom. Once again, upon close inspection, the drill holes are perfectly round. They were not done in modern times. They could not have been done during dynastic times. And the feed rate is much more efficient, or the penetration is much more efficient than what a modern drill can do. Now we're at Aswan itself. So those pock marks that you can see in the stone surface, that is how the dynastic people, and even the later Greeks and the later Romans, that's how they would try to quarry stone. They would create these depressions in the stone in a line, and then they would take wooden wedges and hammer the wedges into the insert there, and then take very hot, usually boiling water, and then pour the boiling water onto the shims or wedges put in there. The wood would expand and then create a crack. So that's very, very, it's a very primitive way of doing things. If the dynastic people had saws to be able to do cutting of stone, of hard stone like this, obviously we would see evidence of that, but we don't. We see this technique. And then here, if you look on the right-hand side, once again, you can see in the middle of the picture where the wedges were inserted. And then over the course of time, hot water poured in, the wood expands, and then over the course of quite a period of time, then probably take weeks or months, then the stone would finally crack and then break off, but in a very rough way. But if you look on the left-hand side, you see those pock marks, and that is much older advanced technology of some kind. We are in fact at what is called the unfinished obelisk, which we're going to get more views of. So here we are here. Sorry, I have to take a brief break for a message. Okay. And Neil actually has sent me a message of some kind. Okay, in fact, I think I'm only like halfway through the slideshow. I'm doing this at a much more relaxed pace than I normally do because I'm at home. But again, you see those scoop marks. The conventional story is that those were made by what are called dolerite pounders, which are rocks used as tools to shape the stone. But dolerite is about 6.5, no, it's about 7.5 in the hardness scale out of 10, whereas the granite itself is 7. So the stone hammers are slightly harder than the stone itself. That's not a very efficient way in order to be able to shape stone. So what we're looking at is ancient advanced technology. And I'm sorry, I do have to take a slight break here for a message. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so what you're looking at is the unfinished obelisk at Aswan. It would have weighed 1,200 tons if it had been completed. 1,200 tons. It's something like 150 feet long. The dynastic people could not have done this work whatsoever. And like just simple questions come to mind. Okay, so the dynastic people are pounding away with stone rocks on stone, trying to shape it. And then how long would that take? How many hundreds of years? How many thousands of these stone hammers would you have to go through? And then also, how were they planning on lifting that stone out of the pit that it's in? That would require, at a bare minimum, 20,000 people coordinated very efficiently. So clearly what we're looking at is we're looking at something pre-dynastic that was in process of being made. Something happened. I believe it was the great cataclysm of 12,000 years ago, and the site had to be abandoned. The conventional story is that Queen Hatshepsut had it commissioned, but any engineer that I've been to Aswan with, they just look at that and go, that would be almost impossible to do today. So how could a Bronze Age people like the dynastic people do that? And this is a look into the left pit. You can see that they were able to create the horizontal surface, but for the vertical surface, they only made it halfway down, and then work suddenly stopped. Again, I think it was a cataclysm. I think we see the same thing at places like Baalbek in Lebanon, the so-called Stone of the Pregnant Woman, which weighs 1,200 tons. It looks like work suddenly stopped. I think it was an ancient cataclysm. And then here we see these scoop marks, perfectly spaced, all the same width, around 12 inches in width. And I think this is evidence of the ancient technology used in order to create what we're looking at. Work suddenly stops. This is actually another smaller obelisk that was being made somewhere in the region of 30 feet long. And I think that the technology involved here was a kind of energy that was being emitted from a machine that was tuned to disturb the frequency of the quartz crystal. So you know that you can take a quartz crystal goblet or glass, and if you strike it with the right sound vibration, you can cause the glass to explode. And I think that that is what happened here. It was some kind of device emanating an energy, and the granite simply turned into sand as this machine was being waved up and down. We also see staircases that were made right next to here with the same machine. So that's more advanced technology than what we have today. Now we are at Sakkara in Egypt. And here you see, this is a piece of limestone, incredibly heavily eroded. The darkening of the surface, I think, is ancient cataclysmic and not the result of simply normal weathering from sun and wind and rain. And there are shafts going down into the bedrock at Sakkara. This is not in general where most of the tourists go, but that's why we get special permission to go to locations like this. So this shaft goes down into the bedrock. It's in the region of 15 to 20 feet wide in terms of the breadth, and it goes down about 100 feet. However, I think it goes down and connects to a series of horizontal shafts, or sorry, tunnels, like what we see at the Giza Plateau, and it's quite possible that Sakkara and the Giza Plateau are interconnected by a series of shafts and tunnels, and there are those that even believe that these shafts and tunnels go at least as far as Karnak, which is hundreds of miles away. So 85% of ancient pre-dynastic Egypt is underground. 85% of pre-dynastic Egypt was made underground using very advanced technology. And this is interesting too. Again, it's because I've been to these places many times that I look for details. So look at the color of this limestone material, but look near the very top surface. You see some areas are reddish and brown. And I think that's indicative of a blast of ancient high heat. Once again, at least 2,000 degrees Celsius striking this location and vaporizing it, just like what we saw at Karnak. So when I go back to Egypt in April, the one thing I have to do, which I have not done in the past, is to make more measurements of the ancient structures in terms of their present orientation. Are they perfectly north, south, east, and west, or are they off by 20 degrees? And to be specific, 23 degrees or 23 and a half, but I'm just using the ballpark figure of around 20. And this too is at Sakkara. So this was a pyramid, and you can see very large slabs of stone used as the casing stone. You see on the right-hand side that it's been basically obliterated, and then you see smaller stone. That is repair work, likely during dynastic times, but the original structure was pre-dynastic. Sakkara is one of the largest ancient archaeological sites in the world. And so there's so much there that it takes multiple trips to get more and more clues as to what happened in the ancient past. And so that's what we're looking at. You see perfectly flat surfaces on the left, and you see smaller kind of rubbly material on the right. And here again, this is at the same structure. You see the charring of the stone, especially in the center. You see the darkening and blackening. That's indicative of high heat, not a local fire that somebody decided to make, but I think this pyramidal structure exploded 12,000 years ago. And again here, look at the horizontal erosion. It's incredible how much erosion that is. That's not simply wind and sand blowing through the air, or blowing through the air to do that. And the discoloration, I think once again that is massive heat scorching and works with Dr. Robert Schuck's theory of solar plasma striking different places like this one. And look at the rubble above. Of course it was quarried, but I think it blew up and then much later on was quarried. And this is a stone box located at underground in Sakkara, weighing approximately 80 tons. You can see the recess on the lid area or the top surface. That's where the original lid would have locked into this box. And I'm not even sure what kind of material this is. It's stone, but I believe it could be dacite, and dacite is not found in Egypt at all. Its nearest location is Turkey. And this simply shows you what the lid looks like. You can see damage to it. You can see the recess where the lid would have almost basically hermetically sealed the box. This stone is very hard. So once again, it was found by the dynastic people, used as a tomb, but it wasn't built by them. And also at Sakkara, this is the so-called step pyramid. The standard idea by modern archaeologists is that this was an experiment to build a pyramid. That first they started with the step pyramid, and then once they were successful with that, then they proceeded to build the so-called bent pyramid, but they miscalculated the angle of the bent pyramid halfway up and then had to correct it, which is really stupid. So I think, in fact, this is a dynastic attempt to build a great pyramid. And the fascinating thing, too, which I just recently found out, is that you can now get access underground inside this pyramid, and that there is a box weighing at least 1,000 tons. So I'm looking forward to hopefully being able to see that either in April of this year or in March of 2020. Now we're at the Serapeum, which is at Sakkara. And the Serapeum is a series of 2 underground tunnels cut into the bedrock. And these are pre-dynastic. The repair work on the left-hand side is dynastic. The dynastic Egyptians found this underground structure of 2 tunnels. And once again, they simply adopted it. It was rediscovered in the 19th century by foreign archaeologists. And the tunnels are fascinating and intriguing. If the lights were not on, then it would be pitch black in there. So the question is, how would the dynastic people have made these tunnels, since we find no evidence of soot on the ceiling? So this is pre-dynastic underground structure found by the dynastic Egyptians. And what's in the tunnels is what's really fascinating here. This is just another view of the length of the tunnel. It's actually much longer than this, and there is a steel door at the back end this way. We were able, I think in March of last year, to have the door opened, and the tunnel continues on for several hundred yards in the opposite direction. Again, it's what happens when you pay extra. So what we find at the Sakkara are 25 stone boxes, each weighing 100 tons apiece. The stone comes from Aswan, hundreds of miles to the south. The stone box and the lid are from the same piece of stone, and the hieroglyphics on the surface were done during dynastic times. So the dynastic people found the boxes and then carved the hieroglyphics on the surface. Because you can see that the quality of the hieroglyphics is incredibly poor as compared to the stone surface itself. The surface is highly polished. Again, 100 tons, and the hieroglyphics are very childlike in terms of their execution. So intriguingly, if you climb inside one of these boxes, it resonates to the sound of Om, just like the king's chamber. This shows you that the lid and the box itself would fit so perfectly together that they would hermetically seal. So the question is, what was the original function? Unlikely as tombs, I think they were part of the resonance system, vibrational resonance system that the ancient original builders constructed. They were a very pragmatic, very left-brain logical people, or being, if you'd like. They were not into artwork, they were into form, and they were into function. And once again, you see the sense of scale. 100 tons, 25 of them, moved hundreds of miles from the Aswan. How were these boxes cut from the quarry? How were these boxes transported from the quarry? How was the lid cut off? How was the lid cut off? The corners on the inside are slightly rounded again, so that would be good for resonance or sound. And again, the hieroglyphics are pre-dynastic. And in the other tunnel, we have a box that was never completed. So this box was roughly shaped, it was hollowed out, and it has a very rough surface. A cataclysmic, or the cataclysmic event happened, and it was left abandoned. And so this shows us the process of how these things were made. They were roughed, maybe outside. Then this one was in process of being moved into its niche. A cataclysm happened, work stopped. And then behind it, by about 40 feet, is the lid. The lid as well is roughed out, as you can see. So this shows us the process. They were roughed out, they were brought inside into a pitch black environment, then they were moved down the hallway and then moved towards it, probably into the niche, and then the lid was put onto the box, and then the fine tuning was done, which means this lid, which weighs 30 tons, would have to be taken off the box, and then measurements would have to be made. The fine finishing work would have to be done in pitch black, and then the lid, 30-ton lid, put back on to hermetically seal the box. That is lost ancient high technology beyond our capability. And now we're at a site called Tanis, and Tanis is in the Nile Delta area of Egypt. The Nile Delta is where almost all of the food of Egypt is grown, right in the very north. And to get to Tanis, you have to walk through an area of agriculture. You have to drive for approximately 2.5 hours, and it's all lush fields of sugarcane and every kind of fruit you can think of and vegetable. Then you get to Tanis, and Tanis is like being on the moon because nothing or almost nothing grows at Tanis. So this box here is another dead giveaway. Notice the lid has clearly been recycled from something else because the sides are very roughly shaped. The hieroglyphics are monstrously huge, and the box underneath it is made of quartzite. It's almost perfect in terms of its construction. And so these two pieces were found by the dynastic Egyptians, and they decided to turn it into a tomb. So this is what Tanis looks like. It's like the moon. It's like walking on flour. This again is a great example of where I think the ancient cataclysm, in this case of heat, and you have to remember or know that the ancient cataclysm was not simply heat, it was also earthquakes, it was the end of the last ice age, the raising of sea level by 350 to 400 feet in a very short period of time. When you look in the background, you can see that you can see the lush farmland and the fact that Tanis, which is only like 20 feet higher than the farmland, it's a moonscape. So this again, I think, shows us the difference between the ancient pre-dynastic hieroglyphics on the left. You can see this is Robert. He's got his 2 fingers inside that feather shape, and it looks machined. And he's someone who works with machines, and he said, those are machine surfaces. Then you look on the right-hand side, excuse me, and you see the much rougher, shallower work done by the dynastic Egyptians. And then this is a piece of quartzite. The light color is the natural color, and then the darker colors are intense heat, 2,000 plus degrees centigrade, making it dark, and quartzite is very high in quartz, of course, so it melts if you apply high heat to it. So once again, I think these hieroglyphics are pre-dynastic. And then this sculpture, I also believe this is pre-dynastic, and it's quartzite. Once again, the light color is the natural color of the stone, and the dark color is heat. So you see the darkening of the stone by a flash of very intense heat, as well as the fact that part of the arm has, both arms actually have blown off, and the front has also blown off. As well, if you look at the background, you see the level of the ground. When the archaeologists found Tanis, they had to dig down to find Tanis. It was completely buried in this flower-like, moon-like landscape sand. So I think what happened was a very intense heat struck the entire Tanis location, then the sand was heated and blown into the sky, and then came down and settled back down, covering Tanis. The dynastic Egyptians did find Tanis, and they built some very rough work there. And then over the course of time, it was once again abandoned, used as a quarry. And in the 19th century, I believe, it was then rediscovered and fully excavated. And again, on the left-hand side, you see the quartzite, that's its natural color. And then all the discoloration that you can see is the result of intense heat. And this is going to be very hard to believe, but I do believe it was the archaeologist Flinders Petrie, who was an Englishman, who was the one who did the excavations at Tanis. And he found this foot, but he also found the remains of two giant statues broken into small pieces. Like, this is a relatively small piece. And he estimated that the statue from which this foot was taken was originally one piece of stone, and that it was 150 feet tall. So that means that this giant sculpture was originally made at Aswan, or the original stone was made or taken from Aswan, which is 700 miles at least, or 700 miles? No, it's about 600 miles from the Aswan quarry. And so we're going back in 2020 to Tanis to see if we could get access to the other pieces of this giant statue. I do find it hard to believe that there was a statue 150 plus feet tall, but that is what very mainstream archaeologists wrote in the 19th century. That was his estimate. And this again, this is my wife next to what was the lid of a giant box. We see bits of the box on the left-hand side and in behind. So this lid and box would probably have originally weighed somewhere around 1,000 tons. And the debris, which you see in the background, again, are all the broken pieces that were found during the excavations at Tanis. On the left-hand side, that is not a hill, that is the surface level that was found by the archaeologists in the 19th century. And another statue that was found, originally buried underground. And the toes of this statue are melted, 2,000 plus degrees centigrade or Celsius. This is a close-up. You can see that the quartz crystal has turned into bubbles of glass-like material. So hopefully by this point in the talk, you're beginning to see the overwhelming evidence of a very advanced civilization in ancient Egypt prior to the dynastic times. The fact that they made statues like this of very human proportioned people, one would think would indicate that they were human, but we don't know. We simply don't know. We call them the Cometians, but we don't know who they were or where they came from or where they went to. I think they were destroyed by the Cataclysm 12,000 years ago, and the land was left abandoned for somewhere at least 6,000 years. Now we have another giant statue, very human looking, very beautiful proportions. And again, you see incredible heat damage to the surface. Once again, this whole area was found buried underground. And so this heat damage had to have been super, super ancient. There are also the remnants of 12 giant obelisks here. And the stone for the obelisk had to come from Aswan. The quartzite had to come from Cairo. You're talking sense of scale, you're talking incredible distance. And some more little random pieces of stone here, broken. I think there were 13 obelisks at Tanis. And it could be that because of the energetic nature of how these structures originally functioned, they could have been a focal point for the actual destruction that happened. It is possible that the energy was either directed at the site or was maybe even attracted to the site. I'm not sure. This is an ongoing study, but these are relatively small bits of stone left behind at Tanis. And a giant column, one piece of stone, at least 40 feet tall. The top is broken off. You see very slight artwork on it, but very machined artwork, just like perfect machining technology employed here. And this is a dynastic wall. So you can see that the dynastic Egyptians found ancient Tanis, or at least uncovered part of ancient Tanis, and then they decided to use it as a ceremonial area. And they took some of the giant stones and somehow were able to lift them up into place, but quite relatively sloppily done. And then in the background, you see that they filled in with smaller stone and clay and material like that. So again, super ancient location, built by mysterious builders, abandoned or destroyed, abandoned, refound, rebuilt. And now I believe, this is the second last location we're going to be at. And this is called the Osiris Shaft. It's located on the Giza Plateau. It was carved into the bedrock, and it was only open to the public 2 years ago. It has never been open to the public prior to this time, but the Council of Antiquities decided, in order to attract more tourists to Egypt, to open up some places that were completely forbidden, and this is one of them. And if you only had to see one location in all of ancient Egypt, this would be the one to do, because it's astonishing. So you enter in, as you can see our group, there's the Great Pyramid in the background. We paid $2,500 for access to this location for 2 hours. And because there were 50 of us, it wasn't really all that expensive, but you have to get special permission. If you just go to the Giza Plateau, you're not allowed inside. You have to pay big time. And that's where we get a lot of our best research from, is from paying for special permission to locations which in general are off limits to the general public. And curiously, Egypt is opening up. More of these ancient structures are being opened to the general public, and that's why we keep going back. So you enter into the bedrock itself. Right above it is the causeway for the second pyramid. So again, Great Pyramid in the background. Second pyramid off to the left-hand side. I do not call them the Kafre and Khufu and Menkaure pyramids because they're much older. So there is looking at the second pyramid and our group going in. None of us had been in here before, including Yusuf Awiyan, who was born across the street from the Sphinx. This was his first trip into the Osiris Shaft. So this is as soon as you get in. You can see there are actually 2 entrances into the bedrock. The one in the back is locked up. The guards opened this one up for us for 2 hours, and I maximize my time. If you want to look on on YouTube, my YouTube channel, which is Brian Forster, please subscribe. I have almost 250,000 subscribers now. So yeah, enter in this way. Then that's looking up at the surface. Again, you can see it's a shaft system that originally opened up to the surface of the Giza Plateau. Locked, of course. And this is looking down into level 1. So you take a ladder down to level 1, and you're going down approximately 30 feet. And this is just showing you the ladder that takes you down. We see lots of machine marks inside. So the shaft system was done by machines. It was not done by hand tools. And this is what level 1 looks like. Somewhere in the region of 15 feet wide, 40, no, it's more than that. It's about 80 feet long. Nothing was found inside. This is called the shaft of Osiris, so-called symbolic tomb, but it was found by the dynastic people, and it's one of the most incredible ancient locations on the planet. So once you get to the end of level 1, then you look down into level 2, and a ladder takes you down 100 feet, deeper into the bedrock. So in level 2, there are 6 niches, and inside there are 2 boxes. Again, these boxes weigh in the nature of 40, let's say 40 tons. This stone is called dacite. It is not found in Egypt. The nearest location is in Turkey. And this is what the interior looks like. There's this very strange black goo that you can see running down the surface. I'm going to take samples of this when I'm back the next time and have it chemically analyzed to see what it is. And this is looking inside. To me, and to be honest, I think that this box exploded. And there's another box that's in there too. Here's the second box. You see the amount of damage to it. I think, again, that there was an internal explosion in both of these. So I think that they were part of energetic devices. And then finally, we're looking down into level 3. This is another 60 feet. So from the surface down underneath the surface of the causeway of the second pyramid, you descend 200 plus feet into the bedrock of the Giza Plateau. And obviously you notice that there's water at the bottom. So this is Yusuf Awiyan at the very bottom. He's standing on a large granite box. He estimates weighs 60 to 80 tons. What the dimensions of the box are compared to the lid, I'm going to check next time. We were too excited when we were in here to be able to do any measurements because we had 2 hours and that was it. And that is looking up from the bottom level. So this is our final location. This is on the Giza Plateau. This is called the Valley Temple, which is right next to the Sphinx, made up of a series of very massive granite blocks brought from Aswan. Super tight fitting, no mortar or clay or cement or anything. You can just see, and you can see the scale. And then this is on the outside of the Valley Temple. So originally it was granite on the outside and then limestone on the in the middle and then granite on the outside. Now granite is very energetic. Limestone is kind of energetically dead to some degree, but it does contain mineral. So it could have been like a giant energetic circuit of some kind. I hesitate to say anything about electricity, but energy, vibration, stuff like that. And this is inside the Valley Temple. You see the very large columns there. And again, the tight-fitting stone. And once again, if you look on the right side in the back, you can see that the inner surface is granite with a core of limestone and then originally an outer core of granite once again. It shows you intriguing water weathering, the lower 50% of the column. So this was at one point in time filled with water. When that was, we don't know, but what we can say is that the last time there was a lot of rain in the Giza Plateau area was 12,000 years ago. And that's what we're going to get into as the final topic, which is going to be the Sphinx. So there is the Sphinx. The Sphinx is one piece of stone, or was originally, carved into what's called the Sphinx enclosure. And again, most archaeologists say it's 4,500 years old, but in fact, 200 geologists from around the world have looked at the vertical erosion you can see in the background, and they estimate the age of that erosion to be at least 12,000 years. Also, if you look on the floor area in the background, you can see that's bedrock. But then when you look at the lower part of the photo, those are blocks. And so what we now know is that there are chambers underneath, hollow chambers underneath the Great Sphinx. And here, this planking you can see was put there not for tourists so that they would keep their feet clean. It's because that rectangular section in the middle is made to come out. So that's the access to the entrance of the Sphinx. There's also an access to the interior of the Sphinx at the back. Also, you see all of the repair work. It's still being repaired to this day. And the repair work dates back probably 4,500 years. From the time of Khufu and Kafre, they began to repair the Sphinx. They did not build it. And if you look at the face, obviously the face has been recarved because the work is quite fresh. So that was done during dynastic times. If you look at the neck and the chest, the amount of weathering, again, indicates its age at being at least 12,000 years old. And this once again is showing you the horizontal weathering, that is wind and sand. The vertical weathering is water. So that means the Sphinx is at a minimum 12,000 years old. And this is just a close-up. Again, 200 plus geologists believe that this weathering is water, precipitation, intense over a long period of time. They estimate, based on climate models, 12,000 plus years old. And this is the entrance to the back of the Sphinx. When we were there last time, this covering had fallen down. So we were able to stick our heads inside the Sphinx, and we found that there is a ladder that takes you into the Sphinx itself. We, of course, could not go in. It's completely prohibited, and we would have been thrown in jail had we tried to do anything like that. And this shows you. It shows you that the Sphinx is hollow. And this is what's left of a 1,000-ton statue made of one piece of stone from Aswan. This is located at the Ramesseum, which is near Thebes, present-day Karnak. 1,000-ton seated or kneeling statue. And that is the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Awesome, brother. You want to go ahead and click stop screen share? There you go. If you look at the bottom of your platform, there should be a button that says Q&A.
Or is it, oh, chat or Q&A?
Q&A and chat,
Okay.
both areas, their questions.
Okay, I don't see any questions.
So in the chat room, there's some. There you
go. Okay, chat. Current investigators typically say the pyramids are more likely 12 to 15,000 years old over the very silly 2,500 years of the mainstream. In fact, they're saying 2,500 BC, but still, you're right. Well, all I can say, is, Elaine, is minimum 12,000. Minimum 12,000. We could be looking at 20,000. We could be looking at 50,000. But I use the term 12,000 because I know for certain that there were a series of cataclysmic global events, which was the end of the last ice age. And so also in the chat, why is it thought that the observed burn effects came from solar effects over possible war attack where energy weapons were used? Well, that's possible, but I tend to go for the more scientifically pragmatic answer rather than something like an ancient nuclear war or something like that, or ancient techno war, just because I go for the obvious first, but I'm open to the idea that it could have been something else. Yes, you're seeing orbs in the photos, but the orbs in general are dust because these in the interiors of these sites are not cleaned very often. And of course, especially around the Giza Plateau, it's a very dusty area. So you can get spheres, you can get orbs in them, but in general, it tends to be simply dust in the air. And yeah, okay, and then in open question from D, thank you so much for this amazing presentation and research. What are your thoughts on the crypt in Dendara? What, as in where I think you mean where the light bulbs are, the so-called light bulbs? That's a very ancient structure. That was only open for the priesthood of ancient Dendera. There are also carvings in that crypt which look like they predate dynastic Egypt and were moved there from a different location. And then from Martine, oh, type answer. Do I have to type the answers or can I just talk?
You can just talk them out.
Okay. Well, no, actually, it's pretty simple and it's pretty logical. And that's the fact is we found quite clearly that there are deep hieroglyphics which have been machined. So that means that they're pre-dynastic. And so the dynastic Egyptians, they enter the area of what we call Egypt, and they supposedly developed the hieroglyphic system all in the first dynasty. That's impossible, which is impossible. You can't come from having no type of written language to having sophisticated hieroglyphics. So I think it's far more likely that they found these ancient hieroglyphics, had no idea what they meant, but they used their own symbolism and invented their own hieroglyphic system of language. I know it's a very controversial idea, but I can't say no to that anymore. Any more?
I don't see any more coming up. Let me take a look in the Q&A. Okay, you've answered, what, 4 questions already, right? Those are the only 4 we have. So let me ask you a question. Through your research, have you seen any direct connections to not only just like pyramids, because obviously there's pyramids worldwide, and why do they all have pyramids, but connection to Peru and Peru culture there?
No, none whatsoever. Whoever did the work in ancient Egypt had nothing to do with Peru. They're 2 completely different civilizations. And also whoever created Pumapunku in Bolivia did nothing else on the planet, at least that we know of. So very different. In Peru, you see organic looking construction. In Egypt, you find very linear. So the stuff in stuff in Egypt is very logical, but the stuff in Peru is very organic, very artistic, very human. I find the stuff in Egypt to be very cold, and if they were an ancient human civilization, then they were a very logical and not a very feeling people. But whoever did the ancient pre-Inca work in Peru seemed to have been a very artistic, beautiful, and right-brained people.
Could there be a common source from their technology, or could they just be individuals that just, you know, became advanced separately from each other?
I think they come from, yeah, they're completely different. If you want to, I'm starting to think less and less of Atlantis being a probability. I'm starting to think less and less that humans had anything to do with this, because we're looking at technology beyond our capabilities. So somebody was here like way more sophisticated than what we are. And that doesn't make sense in terms of human beings unless the cataclysmic events happen to humans who were like hyper advanced, and then they were wiped out, and then we had to start from scratch. That's a possibility, but I'm also open to the idea that these are alien structures. One much more human-like in Peru, one much more linear and logical in Egypt, and also I also think Baalbek in Lebanon, Petra, and pre-dynastic Egypt are connected.
I remember you showing once elongated skulls in Egypt. Am I correct? Did you show that before in a presentation?
Well, yeah, but they're only artistic depictions. I've never seen it. I've never seen an elongated skull in Egypt. So either they're hiding them, or that was simply Akhenaten's thing. I think what Akhenaten was doing was he was trying to tell through art that he came from a very interesting ancient bloodline, which was maybe not even human.
Right. Okay, beautiful, Brian. Do you want to share with the audience a little bit more information about you? You do a lot of tours. That's your main thing. So why don't you end it off by telling us all your info?
Okay, well, actually, the best thing, I've written 36 books, which are all available on Amazon under my name. I'm on Facebook and Twitter, but I'm finding those to be completely useless ways of doing anything anymore because of all the breaches of security, etc. So I basically I don't take Facebook or Twitter or anything like that seriously anymore. I post a bunch of stuff on Instagram just because I've developed actually a huge following on Instagram for some reason, just putting pictures on, but I don't take it very seriously either. We do limited tours now. We do 3 tours of Peru per year, one in June, one in August, one in November. We do one of Egypt per year. We're probably going to expand it to 2 of Egypt per year. I'm going to Turkey for the first time in September. We just came back from Easter Island. I'm going to Contact in the Desert in California in June. And my most powerful tool is my YouTube channel. I have, I think, 1,060 videos, almost 250,000 subscribers, and approaching 60 million views, I think. So I find YouTube to be by far the most useful way of getting information out. So that's basically it.
Nice. Yeah, and I follow your Instagram, and I get all my updates on you from YouTube, and I love your YouTubes and all your Facebook Lives. So thank you, brother. Thank you so much for all you do. You know how much we appreciate you, man. And excited to see what you come up with next.
Oh, you bet. There's a lot more to come.
Yep. It's exciting time.
We also have we're DNA testing 2 more.